Got you?
Yeah.
Great.
Speed on me.
All right, this is Ev Alvarez, 9:25, take 3, marker.
Everett.
Everett,
Alvarez.
Everett, sorry.
Ev, I'm speechless. That was a phenomenally honest, it was absolutely riveting. I want to just cut one piece out of that and nothing else. There's so many things to cover. I want to start with let me go to a quote. You were quoted as saying, "We had a philosophy that you didn't ever let your fellows down. If they couldn't take care of themselves, you took care of them. And we had a goal, because you knew damn well they would do the same. And we had a goal. We were determined to come home with our personal integrity, our reputation, and our honor." There are two things here that I want to touch on. The one is the story of you and your fellow former POWs is an incredible story in history period, but certainly in military history. And as you know from our conversation the other night, the primary audience for this is the military. The military wants to learn from the crucible of leadership that all of you found and discovered together. And one of the ingredients of that begins with exactly the description that you gave. The heartbreaking moment when you are forced under torture to give more than name, rank, and serial number. And you return to your cell crushed, feeling you had betrayed yourself, your country, your corps, and your fellow POWs. And then slowly the chain begins to link up, and each of you join one link of that and offer your stories to each other. And you corroborate, we are all human, we all have limitations. We have to find a new definition of ourselves, because we're not that thing that is betrayal, and we're not that thing that is failure. So somehow you went through the eye of the needle. You got through that moment of failure by finding each other and joining those links to form a new, tougher, more unbreakable chain. Can you speak to this quote that we had a philosophy, you didn't let your fellows down because you knew they would take care of you, you took care of them, and that we were committed to return with our personal integrity, our reputation, and our honor?
I think the best way to address that, if I take it in two parts, maybe. In my particular situation, because I was there alone and they had thrown all this material they had on me within a week after I was captured, where it went, when the Vietnamese wanted to know more about me, and I was still going by name, rank, service number, and date of birth, and that's it. But then I found myself saying, I'm hungry and I'm thirsty. At the same time, they're showing me all this stuff like, we know this already here. The question then became, what do I do? And I think at that point was when I first, in my own mind, conceptualized that, you know what, maybe I should talk. But if I could talk to them in a way that I'm not giving anything, because part of the reason for the code is that you give name, rank, service number, and date of birth because you don't want to put your fellow colleagues that are still fighting over the hill in other parts of the country or back at the ship or in the Air Force flying missions every day. And I didn't have that situation. So in a way, if I could still convey, because one of the things that when I was initially there, I did receive some letters, and I didn't, once my parents, my family, my wife found out, they would write letters and they would bring them in by, not the U.S. government, by delegations. So besides getting that International Red Cross package, that one package, I also received some letters. And I remember that they were worded in such a way from my wife that the question was, are you really alive? So she said something to the effect of, can you tell me when the car payment is due? Which she knows that. And so I could make sure I don't miss the car payments. And so I responded by saying, okay, the car payment is due, certain dates, et cetera, et cetera. And not knowing what was going to happen in the future, what I finally, in my own mind, decided to do was if I could just talk to them without giving them anything, it was important for me to not have violated the intent of the code of conduct and how I should behave. And besides that, I still had my own personal credos, beliefs. I believe I was religious. I was raised Catholic. I used to use the parts from the liturgy, and I even scratched above that little courtyard some of the phrases that kept me going, just to get me going. But if I could just go through this period without losing my self-respect, my dignity in a way, and I didn't know how long this was going to last, but when they offered me the chance to go home, I couldn't even, and people you would say later, well, who would have known the difference? I said, me. I would know. And so my guidance was what I believed. And when I came home, I remember telling my family, after my sister had been in a war and all this stuff, I told my dad, and I said, I could have come home. I could have probably come home a lot sooner. I could have probably come home that first Christmas. If I had given them what they wanted, I could have probably come home later on when they were letting guys go, and Mark Gartley's mother went with a delegation and took him out, and they asked me if I would go home if my sister came. And each time I said, no, not under these conditions, especially the first time. And what I told my dad was, I could have probably come home, Dad, but I don't think you would have been proud of me. So I had built my own self-molded guidance based on my values, what I thought of myself. I didn't know how strong I was, and I found out later on I wasn't a Superman, and I broke, and I gave them what I wanted. And the thing about that later on was we had, as I mentioned before, when I broke, it wasn't, they knew my bio. I was already, I'd been there 2 years, almost, 2 years. And they had a lot on me, but still I was going to resist because it was important. I recognized that I gave in to them. I'd be a puppet, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be able to just pull strings and have them do what I could. I had a cellmate, Red Berg, who went tortured, that summer. He came in, and when we got together, he said, Ev, I don't think I have the strength to resist them anymore. I don't think I can do that. But he did. And so, in a way, I think that I knew I was going to have to set some limits on myself. It's all, these are all subjective personal limits. I can't judge others for having withstood the harshest. I can't criticize others for having given in so quickly. I mean, that's all subjective. And when I came back from that first time in 1966, and it was July 7 or 8, it was a day after the July 6, 1966 march. It was within a week of that I came back again. I felt lower than whale shit because I had violated I had broken my own, what I felt were my standards. And I had succumbed to giving them what they wanted. I didn't take the pain as long as I thought I could. And I recall coming back, and Tom Barrett came back, and then we get on the wall and we're tapping. We tell what's happened to us, and Jim Bell had not been taken out yet. And his first words were, "Hey, you did the best you could. You can't ask for anything else. Now let's build yourselves up, because they're going to come at you again." And they did again and again and again. So the whole thing was the bounce back theory policy was built on the ability to make that subjective judgment to yourself that I've gone as far as I can go for now, because and as far as I want to go for what they want. It is not easy to comprehend why I chose to resist. It would have been far easier, and the way I've explained this before, and it's hard to articulate maybe for me, it would have been far easier on myself to have given them what they wanted without going through the physical pain. And believe me, it was hard, because I knew that I was going to have to undergo physical torture, physical pain. In my mind, there was no way around. Because if I had not, I felt that it would have been far more damaging to the soul, my soul, to have taken the easy way out. And as I said before, people have said, well, who's going to know? Me. And so, having taken that path, I felt it, and you encourage others to do the same. Because, like Redberg said, I don't know if I can resist them anymore. And in a way, I knew that if Redberg had decided not to resist anymore, his soul would have been crushed, his spirit. But he chose to resist again. And in a way that strengthened, and I think we all experience this. On one hand, hey, we all broke, get over it. Let's go on. We have other goals to achieve, so let's stop crying about it. And that seemed to be a common pattern, a common thought, a result of this. We all had other goals to achieve that were far more important than crying over and brooding over it. And if we hadn't resisted, I don't know how we could have gone on. So that was a choice. That was a choice that we made, individually made. I'm not going to say that everybody was a Superman. And there were those that resisted to the point they never came back. They didn't come back. But the bottom line is that, you know, for those of us, I think in a way, that experience was like putting you into a fire and like steel, and in a way it tempered it, it hardened it, it made it, so that when you drew out, you had a stronger product, but you can measure it in terms of a stronger person, a person of stronger character. I don't know if, I'm sure there's a better way to articulate that, but I don't have the words. All I can go by is what we experience and how I look at the past today. And as a result, I think individually, and most of us went through that, it made us better people. It made us stronger. It made our group stronger because we were committed to a goal, as John McCain would say, greater than ourselves. And if you take an action that is something that it will contribute to something greater than yourself, I think in the end, whether you survive or not or what have you, you're going to feel much better about ourselves. We came back from that experience of being a POW with a higher regard for ourselves and for our fellow POWs. Much, much stronger. And I think that's the bond. The reason we have a close bond amongst ourselves is because those of us that you have met or you've interviewed or you can talk to about this, we've all gone through that crucible of fire. We've descended into that labyrinth, perhaps, and we've faced the dragon. And we came out of it. So I don't know what to point out that's strongest a person. I think it's a combination. I think it's the way we were raised as Americans, as we were raised in our belief, our values. But in the end, it provided for me that guidance that I base my decisions on. And I think that if you look at the policies and of what the leaders put together and how they led by example, I think it all ties in. It's all part of the story. It's a big story.
And you've put words to, I can remember sitting with Colonel Atkins and both of us saying there is a soul in this story that if we can find it, it can change the world. And you just put it into words. The Vietnamese had a systematic goal of humiliation. We talked about this the other night. You had to go through that fire of humiliation. Mm-hmm. But what you found was the pure fire of humility. We have, as a people, human beings have struggled with the concept of the Creator since time immemorial. Some call it philosophy, some call it presence, some call it God, some call it whatever. One of the struggles is the word honor, because like the word God, it has no single definition. And you have just described it in the best, I've never heard a better description of it. That it begins with facing oneself, the need to be able to look in the mirror and say,
Yep.
of this I believe.
Right.
And what you've given voice to, that it's not the most perfect picture, it's not the, but it is your picture. And that's worth more than anything. I'm just stunned that you are literally at the core of everything we are seeking to do. I want to talk a little bit. I lost my thing; it went away. This, with everything you went through, you find these connections with these other men, and I'm sure, like any group of people, I read McDaniel said, it's funny, you even sometimes the way people grunted or snorted or walked, it just bugged you. It was just normal human, but you respect it. You respect it. So there's a difference between the normal irritations of just living together, and so you have all these human elements. You spoke about it begins with the tap code, but the tap code was a mechanism, and it was a very sophisticated mechanism. The more I understood about the complexity of the tap code and why the Vietnamese couldn't ever duplicate it and understand your shorthand and your abbreviations. But when you found the tap code, when all of you began, as one former POW would say, you listened at night and it was like the crickets chattering. There was so much tapping going on in the walls that it was this chorus of communication. But the tap code seemed to take on even greater significance. It was a place where one could heal, where one could share one's soul, one's self, one's dreams, one's hopes, one's losses. And therefore it became something far bigger, which we'll get to later when you talk to me about your realization when you went back to visit the Hanoi Hilton. And you began to understand, at first you worried about yourself, that you were not reacting, or you felt you were not having these traumatic feelings. And then you understood that you had shared that on the wall. So talk to me about the wall in its bigger context, the ways that you saw it save, as it did you, others, and the ways that you used it to help others as well.
Well, okay. When I first joined the other first pilots that were shot down at the Briar Patch in September of 1965, I'd been 13 months in, I want to say 8 days, 10 days, something like that, by myself. I was taught the tap code by Scotty Morgan and Ron Storrs, who were in the cell. Then it made sense, and it just became a matter of tapping to practice. And the more we practiced, the better we got. And everybody found that. And some others were really adept to tapping and listening more than others, and so they became the communication when there was in bigger groups, and they became the communications. When they had tapping was one way to do things, to communicate. So it grew in itself. The covert communication system we had was, we recognized right off the bat, and that it was the one element of our existence that was important for our survival, for our survival. Without it, we could not have had the knowledge of what was going on around us, the organization that we had to set up as a military. It kept our organization intact, no matter who was within, within earshot of that, whether we tapped on the wall or we used the same tap code with the broom so it could be heard in the other areas. The communication was so vital, especially when things started to get rough in 1966 and we needed to maintain that coherence. And the mere fact that we used it to also keep ourselves going. I remember at one point while I was still solo, and I was in 1965, before I had my first roommate, I was in one cell and there was another cell, another person solo in the other cell, other room. So there was nobody else around that I could communicate with. So we decided to play chess. And so he drew a little, there was still dust in our cell floors, and draw a chessboard, and with little rocks and stones, and okay, I've got this, my king, and the spaces, and we started playing chess, and we played chess for days. And we played chess, as long as we could, and then he'd take a break to eat, or when they brought food, but that was the first time I ever used it to communicate in such a manner. It was like catharsis in a way. It was where I no longer had, when I was by myself before, I was, like I said, I used to daydream, I used to fantasize, I used to recall, I'd spend days recalling things that happened in your life, and going through from kindergarten to first grade, and where we lived, and who I knew, and that third grade and fourth and so forth. That when I got home, in the celebrations and homecoming, I'd see somebody and I'd say, hey, how's your mom and the first name, and how's your dad, and how's your little brother, and doing this and that? They go, yeah, you remember them? Yeah, I remember, because I had nothing to think about all this time by myself. But interacting with another person was different. Interacting with another person where I could exchange thought and exchange, biographies and where they were from, and just talk. I mean, just plain talk. It really was helpful, because the others didn't spend that long period of time that I had. So, but I knew how important it was and how frustrating it was, so I recognized it's important to keep talking to the people, keep talking to them until they finally had a roommate or a cellmate. And then as you grow into your military operation, the whole system was just vitally important. The key was keep talking at all costs. Just keep talking, and exchange of thought, exchange of ideas, exchange of working out solutions. What do we do here and what do we do there in case of this? All of that was part of coping with the situations, what we were facing. And in one hand, and the other hand was keeping our sanity in a way going in the best manner possible. So communication, tapping, and then when Vietnamese would, some places they built double walls, so it was hollow space in between, and tapping didn't work. And they had already discovered that we used to, in the early days, also write notes. And so when they when you got a cigarette and they would light it, they got rid of the matchstick because they knew we used that match. And so they threw it far away, or they kept it. In other words, they would light your match, throw the burnt matchsticks, and then when they weren't looking, you'd sneak out there. When you were let out of your room, you'd go pick up that matchstick, where the guys would throw it. And you devised notes in this manner. On and on it went. So when they built the double walls, and I remember that Red Berg, who had a sister that was mute, so the family used the mute code. And so looking at the letters, so he and I, he taught me a version of that. And so a year later or sometime later, when he was living in a different building with somebody else and he came over and we couldn't establish, I got on my cellmate. I stood up on my cellmate's shoulders, Dick Ratzlaff, because the shutters had been sealed. The windows had been sealed shut, and all they had was a dark room, was little air holes up there near the ceiling, and the door, a big heavy door that was closed, locked. And it was dark in there. And so I climbed on top and I looked out. I could see over the wall. I could see red. And I caught his attention. I stuck my hand out there and started with it right away. So that spread like wildfire. And so even though the Vietnamese had sealed off the ability to tap between the walls and that, we circumvented that by using one-handed code and other devices. And that's how we went from the zoo to the annex, we call it, back building to building. And the Vietnamese couldn't stop that.
And there were, and if you think about it, the Vietnamese knew the most important thing was to try to break your communication. That's what they were after. Two things, to get you to do propaganda and to break your communication. And there were those who paid the price.
Oh, yeah.
Red McDaniels was in a cell that was central. You speak about James Connell. Do you remember referring to James and his role in the communication network, and how people would step up and take tireless roles in keeping that communication going? Could you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yeah, well, J.J. Connell.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, the Vietnamese knew the importance of it because they themselves had been imprisoned by the French, and they knew the value of communication, especially the officers. And they told me that, how important it was to make sure that they were organized those days. So J.J. was one who's feigned injuries, and as a result of the torture, so the Vietnamese, didn't push. At the time he and I communicated, we were not, he was kept in a little shack by the gate, which we called the gatehouse. And I was across the other side, and I was being punished, and I was being put through to go see delegations. And so we were able to communicate. So he, by being in that little gatehouse, had access to people being punished and what have you, and what the reason they were being punished, and so that he could, he was an important cog of what was going on. And as a result, he would communicate what was happening to other fellows that had been in the carriage shed and other areas. And he was there for quite a while. Then they put him in a cell with a fellow named Len Eastman for a while, but then they took him away. And he was a fellow that we never saw again. I am not familiar with other aspects of his living in the gatehouse. This was at the zoo, and that little call it the gatehouse. It was just a little, they put Doug Hegdal in there also at one point. But as far as J.J. Cannell, I'm not familiar with other aspects of his story to give you an example or comment.
Just that he occupied a central hub of
Yes.
communication network. So did Red McDaniel.
Yeah.
When they were
Yep.
discovered, they paid a heavy price for these things.
No, Red went through, Red McDaniels and Sam Johnson were two individuals that were, they hurt them. Sam Johnson never fully recovered from those injuries that they put him through. Red McDaniels, they went through severe torture. And as Jim Kassler, another one that they used to take out and whip him with a rubber hose, lay him flat and use a rubber hose on him for days and days and days. I mean, to listen to that going, and you couldn't help him. You couldn't do anything to help him. Was so frustrating. But yeah, they went through hell.
And that was punishment for communication.
Punishment for communications. Anytime they were caught communicating, you were punished. Camp commander says no communicating, but you had to do it.
And I believe you were even quoted as saying that the wall, the tap code, was the POW's weapon. That it became not only a source of support and solace between you,
Yeah.
it became a way to organize resistance.
Oh, definitely.
Can you speak to
To organize, maybe I was referring to to the organization in terms of recognizing who was there, and then in terms of who the senior officer was, and in terms of the policies and making sure everybody knew the policies that were at the time. Everybody understood, and of course Doug Hegdal was an example, but we all had to memorize the names of everybody that was there. And all of that was done through the tap wall. Entertainment was done, through tapping on the wall. I like to use an example, poetry. And I mean, it was time fulfilling. You pass the time by passing these things through, and it was somewhat educational in a way, because for me, I mean, I memorized, and I could not today repeat the whole thing, but the Ballad of East and West was probably one of the longer ones that I knew from front to the first word to the end, and I could recite it for you. The Highwayman. On and on. Like I said, I said at one point, I told you that I even memorized some of the sonnets, Shakespeare, and of course, and it would be funny because we'd be sitting, okay, and the fellow would be tapping out. He'll tap out a line or a verse, and he'll repeat it, and everybody in the cell would, okay, memorize it. How do we do that? So we had some characters, and again, there's one ballad that starts out, it's Shakespeare's Love. And it starts out, what is love? Love is not alteration when it's alteration, nor is it to be removed. And I'm not quoting it now, but it starts out like this. Oh no, it is a far greater thing. It is, it's the guiding light, the northern star to that ship, and on it goes. Well, what I remember was funny was that fact that, okay, what is love? Oh no, it is an everlasting thing. Got it? Oh no, it is an everlasting thing. You got it? Oh yes, everything. Oh, so we all say, oh no, It is an everlasting thing. Love is not love, which its alteration finds or bends with the remover to remove. And, oh no, it is an everlasting thing. And it would get animated and everybody's repeating that. And, okay, guys, we got that down. It was a source of entertainment. All that, you couldn't have done that without tapping and or using the shorthand version or what have you. And like I said, humorous stories, funny things, keeping the morale up. That was very important, extremely important. So finding ways to keep your morale, it can be ingenious. See? I mean, it's amazing what individuals can come up with that are creative, different, and serve its purpose of, in our case, keeping ourselves going. And you couldn't have done that alone. It had to be others, and a oneness. There's a oneness to you and that person on the other side of the wall, or that group on the other side. You're all one in a common battle.
Wow. I'm just speechless, honestly.
I got it. I just remembered, love is not love, which its alteration finds or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is a far greater thing. On and on.
We'll get a
It comes back.
Which ballad is that? Do you know?
It's a sonnet, Love, by William Shakespeare.
We'll get a copy of that, okay, Care Bear? Not right now, but I'd love to record you.
Is this going to be taught? But guys, here's midshipman.
I would just love to hear you read that. We'll do it off camera. John, you'll be old day. We'll just grab a piece of that. I'm just so excited with everything that you're doing. Okay, we touched on. Oh, I remember what I wanted to touch on. You had told me in your house, in your home, that the Vietnamese never really understood the American soldier.
That's what they said.
And I'd love to hear that story. Let me preface it a little bit. In our culture, I've been thinking about this, in America, if we capture an enemy, it wouldn't even occur to us that we needed propaganda that had enemy to go on television and say what a bad country the other. We don't think that. We think of ourselves as a great nation, and we don't need to sell that to anyone. In a communist society, much of the structure of it is about indoctrination, buying into the point of view. And when you are loyal to a cause that has been forced down your throat, it's different than being loyal to a nation that you believe in. And I wonder or suspect that perhaps part of what they never understood about the American soldier was contained in that. And could you speak to that story about this Vietnamese gentleman saying this to you and what your thoughts are on how it was that they never understood what it was to be American? And how being American may have figured into your experience.
I don't know if I can state this, broadly for the American military fighting man, because it wasn't until we who were prisoners went through what we did that revealed itself within us and with our thinking and our thought and our knowledge in the sense of how unique we are as a country. we sort of took it for granted before that anyway. You took so many things for granted, but then you begin to realize, and like John McCain said, it used to say at one point, I fell in love with my country when I was a pre-OW in Hanoi. That happened to a lot of us, where we recognized the greatness of it with regard to the freedoms and the values and the beliefs that we as Americans basically hold. We don't pay tribute to it enough. We don't think about it enough. We're consumed with other things that are more at this day like my wife says, too many women are concerned with their abortions and this and that to give thought to others, you know. But I think that in a situation like this where we went into it and we went through the conditions and that we were faced with, the confinement, the camp commander's regulations, punishments, tortures, physical situation, all of that, and knowing that that indoctrination and propaganda is important to a totalitarian state like it was. That is, at least we were educated enough to recognize this is we were going to be facing this. And so we braced ourselves in many ways with, when they came after us. So, and it was always start out in the tone of, look, that we went through our fight for our liberation, our freedom, just like you did. So you should really be compassionate. They didn't say it, but you should understand what we're doing is fighting for our freedom and independence like you did. Therefore, we shouldn't be fighting us and on and on. And until we recognized that we were going to be, we were criminals, we were the darkest of criminals, and we were going to be treated that way. And so knowing we had to go through this, we were going to be faced with this experience and go through it, I don't know, but I remember the officers when I was initially there and going through interrogation and the history lessons and the experiences of the Vietnamese people under French colonialism and the subjugation of the Vietnamese people, quote unquote, that when they explained it to the French prisoners, because a lot of these French prisoners were not French, they were French foreign legionnaires. They were Moroccan, Tunisian, or North African, what have you, and so they would, quote, learn. They found they couldn't understand in some ways why we didn't recognize, and so that was part of their battle. And so part of it was the indoctrination, and of course that was all in line with not only recognizing what their fight was for, and I mean, but that we were our country was wrong, we were oppressors, we were neo-colonialists, we were, and on and it went. And we didn't buy that, and because as I used to tell them, I says, look, I know there's another side to the story you're not telling me, and someday when I go home, I will learn, I will compare what you're telling me with what the rest of the world is, because I didn't really, prior to being shot down, know enough about Indochina and all that. So we held according to them, a bad attitude, a hard attitude. We were criminals, and we were not good people. And until we were good people, we wouldn't be able to go home. Years later, when we were getting ready to go home, we had what I call an exit interview. And the camp commander at the time was chatting, how are you, this and that. We were called into the tent one by one at this particular tent that was set up in the courtyard of the Hanoi Hilton, and one part. And then his comment was, you know, Alvarez, we don't understand your American military man, referring to us. He says, we cannot convince you. We could not convince you. We convinced the French, speaking generally, I guess, or with regard to their experience. We couldn't convince you. In other words, I felt that as a compliment to holding out to our beliefs, to not collaborate, to not give in to them, resisting their attempts at indoctrination and propaganda and everything. And I thought about that for a while. And I probably I think I wrote about it. Sometimes I did. Other times I talked about it. But I thought that as a tribute to our guys. Now, I don't know how many people were told this. But I recall. And I remember telling that to Stockdale at some point on our way home. So he used that in one of his talks. I have a copy of that.
I'm going to stop for a little second. We're going to carry, Eva's got a little shiny, and
I'm getting shiny.